Welcome to the Partardez channel. Today, we explain Prophets, Kings 2, chapter 17 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're looking at one of the absolute most pivotal, tragic, and honestly fascinating moments in all of biblical history. We are talking about the absolute collapse, the end of the line for the northern kingdom of Israel. So settle in because there is a lot to unpack here. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll set the stage with context and the king. Second, we'll look at the actual historical events of the fall of Samaria. Third, we'll dig into the spiritual root cause. Why did Israel fall? Fourth, we're going to explore a really bizarre aftermath involving lions and mixed religions. Fifth, we'll pull out the key ideas and lessons. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a recap and our final thoughts. All right, part 1, context and the king. Let's get our bearings. Okay, let's dive into this. To really set the stage, we need to know exactly where we are on the timeline. Down in the south, in the kingdom of Judah, we are in the 12th year of King Ahaz. Meanwhile, up north, Hoshea, the son of Elah, becomes king over Israel, ruling from the capital city of Samaria. He reigns for 9 years, and the text tells us he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And spoiler alert, he marks the very end of the line for the northern kingdom. So we really have to ask the big question here. How exactly does a kingdom that has stood for over 2 centuries just suddenly get wiped off the map? The stakes in this chapter literally could not be higher, and as you'll see, it all begins with a highly dangerous game of political rebellion. So King Hoshea finds himself dealing with a massive, terrifying superpower, the Assyrian Empire. Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, comes up against Hoshea, and Hoshea is forced to become his vassal. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, in simple English, being a vassal means you are a subordinate ruler. You get to keep your throne, but you are forced to pay incredibly heavy taxes, a tribute, to a stronger empire just to avoid being utterly destroyed. It's kind of like paying protection money. For a while, Hoshea pays this tribute, he plays along, but then he makes a massive, fatal miscalculation. He secretly sends envoys to So, the king of Egypt, trying to form a back-channel alliance, and he abruptly stops paying his yearly tribute to Assyria. Well, when the king of Assyria discovers this betrayal, he is absolutely furious. No way is he letting that slide. He immediately seizes Hoshea and throws him straight into prison. That brings us to part 2, the fall of Samaria, the Assyrian invasion. That political betrayal by Hoshea triggers a massive physical invasion, which we see detailed in verses 1 through 6. The king of Assyria doesn't just stop at throwing Hoshea in a dungeon. He marches his massive army right up to the capital and lays siege to the entire city of Samaria. And this siege lasts for 3 agonizing years. I really want you to stop and think about that duration for a second. 3 whole years, trapped inside your own city walls, completely cut off from trade, cut off from your crops, cut off from any outside help. The starvation, the disease, the sheer desperation inside Samaria over those 3 years would have been absolutely horrific. Let's move to and see how this builds historically. It's actually a surprisingly rapid collapse when you lay it all out. In year 1, Hoshea pays his tribute, keeping the peace. But by year 2, he stops that tribute and secretly plots with Egypt. In year 3, Assyria strikes back hard, imprisons Hoshea, and begins that terrifying 3-year siege of the capital. Finally, in the 9th year of Hoshea's reign, the city defenses completely break. Samaria falls, and the Assyrian king initiates a brutal mass deportation. He entirely empties out the physical nation of Israel. He captures the Israelites and deports them far, far away into Assyria, settling them in completely foreign places like Hala and Gozan on the Habor River, and in the distant towns of the Medes. The northern kingdom is essentially gone. Which leads us to part 3. Why did Israel fall? We've seen the historical what. Now we need to look at the spiritual root cause. At this point, the text actually pauses the historical narrative right in verses 7 through 23 to give us a profound theological explanation for why all of this happened. And we shouldn't rush through this. We really need to let the gravity of these transgressions sink in. The simple meaning here, the Peshat, lays out a devastating laundry list of sins. The text says the Israelites secretly did things against the Lord that were just not right. They built high places, which are basically unauthorized hilltop shrines in literally all their towns, from the smallest, quietest watchtower to the largest fortified city. They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles, which were wooden symbols dedicated to pagan fertility goddesses, and they put them under every spreading tree. They burned incense to other gods, and tragically, it got even darker. They actually sacrificed their own sons and daughters in the fire. Unthinkable, right? Finally, they practiced divination and sorcery, seeking spiritual guidance from dark, forbidden sources rather than from God. Every single one of these actions was a blatant, direct violation of the covenant they had made with God back at Mount Sinai. And this brilliantly illustrates an absolutely crucial aspect of God's character in the text: his deep patience and mercy. You see, the Lord didn't just strike them down instantly the first time they messed up. Verse 13 tells us that God actively warned Israel and Judah too, through all his prophets and seers. He kept sending messengers saying, "Turn from your evil ways, observe my commands and decrees." But they just wouldn't listen. The text vividly describes them as stiff-necked. It's a great metaphor, actually. Think of a stubborn farm animal, like an ox, that completely stiffens its neck and refuses to be guided by the farmer. That was Israel. They completely rejected his warnings and followed worthless idols instead, because they persisted in those original, deep-rooted sins introduced centuries earlier by King Jeroboam, specifically the worship of the golden calves, and then added all these other pagan horrors on top of it. The text delivers an incredibly solemn verdict. Verse 18 states plainly, "So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left." Because of their deep, unyielding spiritual betrayal, God finally stepped back. He removed his divine protection. And without that protection, they were violently thrust into exile. Now we move to part 4, Lions and Mixed Religions. This is the aftermath, and it is wild. This brings us to the strange, almost unbelievable series of events that unfolded next in verses 24 through 41. So the land of Samaria is largely empty. To replace the deported Israelites, the king of Assyria brings in foreigners from completely different regions of the empire, places like Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and he settles them right there in the towns of Samaria. Now, when these new people arrive, they do not fear the Lord. They don't even know him. So God sends deadly lions among them, and these lions literally begin killing them off. As you can imagine, total panic ensues. A frantic report goes all the way back to the king of Assyria saying, "Hey, these new people you sent, they don't know what the God of this land requires, so he is actively killing them with lions." In response, the Assyrian king orders an immediate emergency plan. He takes one of those exiled Israelite priests and sends him all the way back to live in Bethel. The priest's specific mission? To teach these foreigners the manner of the God of the land so the lion attacks will stop. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is exactly how this emergency plan failed. The Israelite priest comes back, he sets up shop, and he tries to teach them how to worship the Lord. But look at the actual results. Each national group just takes the Lord and adds him to their existing pantheon of horrific idols. It's a total spiritual mashup. The men of Babylon made Succoth-Benoth, the men of Cutha worshipped Nergal, the men of Hamath made Ashima, the Avites worshipped Nabaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites, they continued the absolute darkest practice of all, actually burning their own children in the fire to their gods Adramelech and Anamelech. So this resulted in a highly conflicted, thoroughly mixed religion. Think about it. The covenant from Mount Sinai specifically commanded the Israelites to worship the Lord exclusively and fear absolutely no other gods. But the reality on the ground in Samaria for these new inhabitants is perfectly, tragically captured in verse 33. They worshipped the Lord, but they also served their own gods. They feared God purely out of sheer terror because, no one wants to be eaten by lions. But their hearts were still entirely devoted to the customs and the idols of their home nations. It was a completely superficial, fractured faith. All right, part 5, key ideas and lessons. What are our practical takeaways here? Moving beyond the ancient history, what can we actually learn to improve ourselves today? Let's break down these life lessons based purely on the simple meaning of this text. Step 1. Listen to warnings. God sent prophet after prophet to Israel, but they were stiff-necked. We have to ask ourselves, are we willing to self-correct when we realize we are veering off the right path? Step 2. Avoid mixed allegiances. The foreigners in Samaria feared the Lord just enough to avoid getting punished, but they still loved their idols. We have to really look at ourselves and ask if we are treating our faith as just an insurance policy, while our hearts secretly belong to modern idols, things like wealth, status, or power. Step 3. Remain entirely faithful. As this chapter painfully explicitly shows, partial obedience is still disobedience. Mixing truth with falsehood doesn't work. It ultimately just leads to spiritual exile. And that brings us to part 6, recap and final thoughts. Let's summarize chapter 17. So the crucial point is this. Chapter 17 is the definitive, tragic end of the Northern Kingdom. It starts politically, right? King Hoshea's secret, foolish betrayal leads to a horrific 3-year Assyrian siege. But it ends spiritually, revealing that Samaria actually fell because of deep, persistent, and frankly horrific idolatry, despite constant patient warnings from God. As a direct result, the Israelites are deported, completely foreign nations repopulate the land, and after facing sheer panic and divine punishment via lions, a very strange, conflicted, mixed religion takes permanent root in the land of Samaria.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Looking at the complete tragedy of the Northern Kingdom and the bizarre, mixed faith of those new inhabitants, we really have to look in the mirror. Are we fully committed to the covenant? Or, if we're being honest, are we quietly serving our own idols on the side? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.